Okay. And then you can continue the conversation. Julian,
Or
we're
shall we?
recording. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I will actually let us open the meeting and then I'll let you guys continue this conversation briefly. So I'll go around. This is the 2024 Charter Review Committee. Now we're in 2025. And this is our June 5th meeting. I'll go around and say who can be heard. We're on Zoom. Meg?
I'm here and I hear you and I'm about to move my location, but you'll see.
I'm here. Raphael?
Here.
Erica?
Here.
Andy?
Here.
And Ken?
Here.
And I do not see Bernie or Marcus yet, but
Bernie said he would be late.
okay, great. If they happen to join us, we will welcome them to the discussion.
Julian, just a housekeeping before we get. I think you said I'm the one taking minutes this time.
Yep, that's correct. And
If anyone could trade with me, I'd be grateful because I'm going to be in my car. I mean, I could listen to the recording, but
yeah, I'll open it up to folks to trade. If not, you can listen to the recording. Is anyone willing?
okay, I'll listen to the recording. I mean, I just don't have any way of taking notes.
No problem.
Because I'm going to be sitting in the
They
car.
post the recordings on Friday, so you'll only have to wait like a day.
Yeah, yay.
Sorry.
I found the recording really easy to just skim through the
Yeah.
transcript and just, boom, boom, boom.
Okay.
It wasn't terrible.
You can zoom forward on it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
now
moving us along, we were discussing about potential ways to not make the Collins Center wait while we go through some of our subcommittee updates and other little deliberations. And me and Erica and Andy and Pat and Anthony discussed this the other day. So I'll let Pat or Anthony respond with what they were saying, and then if we still do want a solution after that, I have two suggestions.
Sure, I'll respond. I think I mentioned that you were concerned that it was a waste of our time. I don't consider it a waste to listen through their committee reports. I think that's important information for us to glean as well. So, as long as that's done in as expeditious a manner as possible and still leaving us a lot of time to talk about the charter, I don't think you necessarily have to save them to the end. Just, like everything that you're working on, just be mindful of the amount of work that you have to get done in your 2 hours. But I, for one, am happy to listen to that part and don't feel we need to start attending later in the time because I'm very interested in your progress on both of these committees.
Thank you, Pat. I'll try to limit our subcommittee updates to like 15 minutes or so in total, so like a few minutes each. And that'll hopefully be a little more efficient, but I appreciate your willingness to stick with us for that. Does that address your concerns, Meg?
Yes. Thank you. I'm just going to be on mute because I'm in a car.
Excellent. It looks like Bernie has joined us, so we don't need to worry about a quorum. Bernie, can you?
I have, yes, I can hear and be heard. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks. So we'll get started. Did everyone get a chance to see the minutes from our last meeting that Ken wrote up?
I think I wrote it.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Whoops. My bad. Sorry, Andy.
It's okay.
Does anybody want to make a motion to approve those minutes for us?
So moved.
Excellent. Second.
Second.
Perfect. I'll give it to you, Bernie, since I'm always saying something. Meg, for voting minutes?
Yes.
Myself, I'm an I. Raphael?
Yes.
Erica?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Bernie?
Yes.
and Ken.
Yes.
Excellent. That's unanimous with two, or no, just one member absent, I believe. Excellent. We only have one attendee, but if you would like to make a public comment, the time is now. I'll give you 3 minutes to discuss with the committee any concerns you have. And you can raise your hand on Zoom or press star 9 on a telephone to make a comment if you would like. Okay, I don't see anything. So no public comment, and I will now move us along to our outreach subcommittee update. Asking for an update on the listening sessions. I know you sent a document along, Meg, but if Erica, Raphael, or Meg would like to update us in maybe 7 or 8 minutes, that would be great.
Meg, do you want to speak to that first, or I can do my part of the update?
Why don't you do your part of the update first, and then
Okay.
I'll share what mine.
So I can sort of summarize without getting into too much detail that Raphael and Meg, and I had to be absent for part of the interim between last meeting and this meeting, but Meg and Raphael both were doing legwork to secure our dates and locations. I believe that from the last bit that Meg was able to do, we have 3 confirmed dates at for listening sessions to be held at the Bangs Community Center, and which I am so pleased about, so that we can finally get started on the rest of the planning that has to happen now that we have locked in. As a result of that, we were able to finalize the sort of publicity materials and accessories that go with that. So those dates were put on a flyer and on the website that I've already shared with this group a couple of times, so that now that we have dates, those can go live and help to publicize the event. So those things have been sent over to Sam Giffen at the communications office with a kind of green light for us to publicize those 3 dates plus an additional Zoom session, which falls between, I believe, the 3rd and 4th. I'll confirm that in a minute. So that's where all of that is at. We're doing just a short update today, but we will want to recruit and delegate facilitation for each of those sessions. I'm sort of speaking for Meg and Raphael, but I think we've discussed this before, that between the 3 of us, we will work out the facilitation for the first meeting, for the first session, which is June 18th. And that we can work out sort of the protocol for how that's going to go in our subcommittee meeting, and then bring that back with kind of recommendations and again, recruiting for other people to facilitate the kind of subsequent sessions after that. Meg, you want to
add one thing to that? Yeah, we'd also like more than the outreach committee to attend these. Ideally, there would be 2 or 3 others of you who could also be table facilitators, but it would give you a feel of what people are saying and what's going on. And I'm happy to take that on. If you could email me which ones you would like to attend. They're in the memo that was circulated. I mean, it's really, I know there are all these ways, discussions about recording and note taking, but there's nothing like being there.
Yes.
Over.
Okay, thank you.
Lower, and mute.
Thank you, Meg. And while I'm at it, I just want to say again, a big thank you to Meg and Raphael for pursuing all kinds of unfortunate dead ends and still, managing to break through and get us dates and locations despite the budget and calendar challenges. So thank you very much for all of that. The other piece I wanted to add as part of our update is that all of the materials for the town official and staff survey have also been sent over. so that that can be launched with the list of names that we had collected and with the approved survey as it was. The only missing piece was, again, linking back to a website to provide sort of more information and back up our presence and our other activities at the same time that we publicize the survey. So that's all out the door. And we set I put a closing date for that survey for July 31st. I'll be working with Sam to make sure that that gets launched in a timely way so that we can push for as many responses as we can get in the initial period and not drag it out too long. I don't know if anybody has any feedback or thoughts about any of that, but that's basically the extent of the report, and the subcommittee will have to meet next week to figure out the rest of the details for facilitating the meeting. Oh, and I had one thing to add, but Andy had his hand up.
Go ahead.
Do you have the dates of the
Yeah.
all the sessions?
I do. And I can't put it in, and there's no chat to put it in, but I can share again the link to the website, which contains all this information,
Okay.
so that everyone has it in hand and you can publicize it to your own
And
networks.
Athena, could that link be posted onto the town website or somewhere accessible for folks to see?
Yeah, Sam is going to be, sorry to speak for you, Athena, but we did talk to Sam about that, and Sam will be posting it so that they, one doesn't rule out the other. They will both kind of link to each other.
On both social media and the website itself? The town website?
It'll be on, our website will be linked on the town website and through all of the platforms that Sam has available.
But will the dates for the event be linked?
The dates are all on the website, and so, yeah.
Or on both the town website and the private website?
I can send a note to Sam to make sure that she does that, but I would assume that that's part of her
Right. Perfect.
standard
Awesome.
practice.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah. Sorry for the micromanaging.
The last piece that
Yeah.
I wanted to add is one thing for the website that I held back on is I had a notion that it would be helpful to have a kind of a sort of FAQ about what the committee is doing, so that given some of the questions and opinions that have been floating around about what is the committee doing and what it takes so long and what is the purpose and what is the destination, what are the goals and everything, all of that, I thought it might be helpful to have a kind of FAQ on the page. And so I pulled it down because it was too much for me to write solo, but I would actually like to recruit some help to put up a very simple FAQ about our basic story to accompany the website. That's all. Meg?
Sorry, Meg.
I wanted to clarify that our subcommittee is going to create the materials for the listening sessions or organize having them made and make sure everybody's cool with that. And if you have things you'd like us to consider, then let us know a week from tonight. And also, I guess this for the extent to which we might want to use these listening sessions to get feedback on things we've already heard. Because we actually have heard a lot. It'd be interesting if what is the committee with Ken and Andy and Bernie and Marcus, that committee wanted to have input into anything to do with the listening sessions. But you're going to have your report now, so I just want to be sure the right hand and the left hand are working on the same thing.
Would you,
Great.
to wrap up, would you like me to give the dates allowed here
That
for the
would be
record?
great.
Yes, please.
First session, Wednesday, June 18th, 7 p.m. at the Bangs Community Center. Second session, Monday, June 30th at 7 p.m., also at the Bangs. We're proposing a Zoom session, Tuesday, July 8th at 7 p.m. And the last scheduled one, back at the Bangs, Wednesday, July 23rd, 7 p.m.
Awesome, thank you. That was actually relatively timely too. So I appreciate it. Raphael, anything to add?
No, it's great
Great.
that we're launching. Thanks.
Andy, do you want to give an update on the feedback subcommittee?
Sure. I just wanted to ask, as far as the survey goes, that you sent to town hall, an online survey, they can do it pretty quickly. I don't know if you want to, up that end date. I mean, if we could get it by the end of June, that would give us more to work with. I don't know. I mean,
I hear what you're saying. The only reason I fudged it to the end of July was to give Sam enough, because remember, we decided we're putting it out with an introduction from us, but through Sam's distribution.
see, yeah.
And so in order, I don't know what is on her plate right now. And so in order to give her enough time to get it out to all the people that were asking her to get out to, I wasn't sure how much time she would need.
Yeah.
And so I hear you. I initially put it like July 15th, let's get it done. But then I thought maybe she needs a little bit more lead time.
Yeah.
So I don't know if other people have input about that, I can take that back to her. Meg?
Meg, go ahead.
It might be worth asking her what timeline works for her.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that might be a good next step and just follow that. Andy, do you want to give us our feedback update?
Yeah. We basically are, I think as we said the last time, that we're planning to organize feedback section by section, article by article, and then also sort of arrange within each article, to the degree possible, arranged by level of difficulty of implementation. So things that the council could do on its own would come first, and then things that might require more of a heavy lift through the legislature or another charter commission or something would be, separated from those, so that it would be, organized in some sort of logical way. We talked about getting, making sure that we have a Collins Center giving us input on how to sort the ideas if we need that, and then having KP Law look at the ideas to make sure that we have a legal opinion as to that we're categorizing them correctly about who can act on each of the ideas. Bernie's going to go through the public comments in the meetings that we've had to date to pull out any public comments that have been ideas that people have put in through public comments. So we'll have those to put into the hopper. The surveys we talked about, just looking forward to getting that data. I think we wanted to actually ask the Collins Center if there were any strategies that they'd seen for sorting ideas, sorting, and if we're, and I know we talked a little bit with them on Tuesday, and the sense was that we may not get, we already have a fair number of ideas that have come in, and it may not be the onslaught of public ideas that we might be expecting, but to whatever extent that we have them, and that we're looking to say, does this belong in Article 2 or Article 5 or whatever, maybe having them look at our list and hearing about our process, maybe they could give us feedback on that. So I assume that would be copacetic.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments or questions about that update?
Well, just the future dinner, we're going to look, we're basically looking to catch whatever comes in from the outreach process, and we'll be talking about how to store and sort the information, and the sense that at the end of this process, we're going to want to have an archive of all of the ideas that came in. So we want to make sure that we're saving everything, and then some things will be ideas that it's not obvious what category they go in, or if they overlap in various articles or whatever. So we'll have to figure out how to deal with that. But I think that at this point, we're just we're ready to catch whatever comes in. And so you know, that we're basically talking about how to work, you know, how to be ready for that. So we're looking at the various sources of ideas that we've had already, and making sure that we're not missing anything that we already have, and then looking forward to getting the new information.
Awesome, thank you. Any
Anything else from the committee?
questions, comments about that? No?
Okay.
Okay, excellent. I appreciate it. We will now move, I'll hand it over to Collins to start. Meg?
There was also the very small subcommittee draft budget. Andy, I
It's
we probably
breaking
have
up.
a 30-second report, don't we, Andy?
Oh, well, Megan,
Did you hear any? There's the budget subcommittee of Met. Andy, why don't you, since I'm
sure.
breaking up?
At the last meeting, we talked about coming up with a budget for you know, expenses that that might come up with future outreach sessions, perhaps, you know, not this round, but then, you know, when we're running things, when we have something to run by the public down the road, or if we're looking to mail things out or whatever. So we started coming up with categories and numbers, and then we emailed Sam Griffin, yeah, to try to get a sense of, you know, what kinds of mailing lists they have for households, and what, you know, how many postcards we would need to order and things like that if we're going to be sending things out. So we're going to talk with her about that further.
And for our next meeting, I'll be there and I'll donate some cider donuts or cranberry juice or something. So no
Yeah, we
need
can bring some stuff to the meetings too.
All right, thanks. I'm glad we were able to wrap that up in 30 minutes, so I can pass it off to Pat and Anthony for our Article 3 review, followed by Article 4, and if we have time, some of Article 5. And just feel free to raise your hand or chime in, committee members, if you have questions during the presentation, and we'll sort of do it article by article once they stop presenting.
Thank you so much. Anthony is actually going to share the articles as we go along, while we talk a little bit about each. I wasn't at the last meeting, but I encourage you to chime in if you're aware of any public input issues or have questions or ideas, and we can record them. This is kind of intended to be an overview, and we will revisit things, but it'd be great to get an idea of your input along the way. So we'll start off with the executive branch, and that's Article 3. You made it all the way through Articles 1 and 2 at least once to take a look at them, right? At your last meeting, I'm pretty sure you did. Okay, just wanted to check in. So Section 3.1 is a very standard appointment and qualifications section. Basically states the town council is appointing the town manager by a majority vote. And there's typical language saying it shall be a person of proven administrative ability, especially qualified by education and training. This is very standard language, because you really want to give town council some freedom and leeway to attract the largest pool of applicants in order to get the best candidates. So it's pretty standard language. Most appointment terms tend to be governed by an employment contract. So that a term language is not in this provision. Although, you know, some have some reference to terms, but usually that's governed by employment contracts. The only item I wanted to point out is just there's a residency requirement of establishing residency within a year, unless waived by town council. And that tends to be a compromise between the, you know, no residency requirement at all or full residency immediately requirement. It seems to be a compromise in between. I don't know if that's been an issue for your town. So, you know, I'd love to hear just in general about the appointment, if you have any input about the appointment process and whether the residency requirement as written has been working out for you.
in my mind, the town manager, he lives in town and he's been pretty engaged in town affairs, not missing out on anything. So that's my opinion. I think it's worked fine. Bernie?
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't had a problem with it because our town manager is renting property here and he's been here and will be here until he decides to retire. I have a problem with residency requirements because they do tend to dissuade applicants, especially given the cost of housing in Amherst. We have a number of town employees who can't afford to live in town. And presumably we're compensating the town manager sufficiently that the town manager can afford Amherst housing. But I tend to look at residency requirements as impediments, not features, and react badly to them. I've been a town manager in 3 communities, and none of them have required me to live in them, and I don't know why one would need to. The important part is whomever is functioning as town manager is available 24/7, which can happen whether you're right in town or 15 minutes or even a couple of hours away. So that's that my input would be to if I had my druthers, I would eliminate the residency requirement.
Andy?
Yeah, it hasn't come up here because the town manager was here before the charter was. So we haven't had to hire anybody. So he was already living here before we had this requirement. So we don't have any empirical data on that. I would tend to agree that somebody could be a town manager. It might be a relief to a town manager to go home to, just that over the border so they can have some peace and quiet somewhere else. But I don't think it necessarily matters whether we have it or not. But so.
Raphael? You're muted.
That being said, there are a number of arguments for why residency that I won't take up here, but there are some arguments about why it could be helpful for that person in that role and the town or community.
I would just say I feel like, and I don't know how this could be legislated, I feel like as it is, this sort of strikes a good middle balance and doesn't really need our attention, in my opinion. But I think it's worth noting there's a difference between a town manager who lives in Hadley or Belchertown, and a town manager who lives in Wellesley and works remotely mostly. I feel like one's pretty appropriate and one is not. I'll let Collins move us along if there's not other comments.
Meg has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you, Meg. Go ahead.
I did, not to extend this longer, but I agree with Raphael. There are all sorts of reasons why the manager, not necessarily everybody who works for the town, but needs to be pretty connected with the physical community. But let's keep going.
Just to piggyback, I do think that the fact that we have the town council can waive the residency requirement does give it a, so if the town council is excited about a candidate, they'll probably waive it and giving them that judgment to say, oh no, that's too far away, we won't waive it, or you're next door, we will. Maybe that's a safety net.
I would agree. I think it's pretty well written. Other comments? No. Pat, go ahead.
Great. So we'll scroll down a little bit to section 3.2 if there's no other comments about appointments and qualifications. This lists the powers and duties of the position. The town manager is essentially the chief executive officer, the executive branch of government, and responsible for implementing policy directions provided by town council. So I think I'm going to go through these briefly, and I think this, and please, I'm not just asking you to chime in if you have any ideas for specific areas that you want to discuss further. At the end, we'll kind of go back and talk about them all. Essentially, the town manager supervises, directs, and is responsible for the efficient administration of all town activities under their control. And so they are ultimately in charge of the executive branch and making sure that government works in town. They are, they're responsible for administering all of the measures adopted by town council and other regulations by other agencies. They attend the meetings of town council unless excused, keep town council informed of the needs of town, make recommendations to the council, including measures requiring action. So it's really two ways. They're not just implementing town council's policies, but they're also making recommendations and are a professional opinion giving for town council to for their goals in government. The town manager determines the existence of a public emergency and maintains public safety, order, and enforcement of laws. Notifies the council of public emergencies within 24 hours. So I'm just going to take a pause there to ask if there's any questions before we move into the next one. These are all fairly, these are all common provisions reflecting the executive branch, but I'm happy to go into more detail if anyone has any questions about these, or we can just move forward to the rest and then talk about them all in a whole. Okay, great.
So far,
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I chime in real quick? Just, not to sort of derail the group, but I just want to bring your attention to the school committee and the regional school committee, and here in this, like, the second to last sentence, I guess you just may want to think about it because there's a regional school, but there's not a school committee in Amherst other than the regional school committee. So just sort of raising that for people to sort of tuck in their minds as they look at this.
There is an Amherst School Committee as well as a regional school committee.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, because
we're not
okay.
fully regionalized. We have Amherst elementary schools, and then we have regional middle and high schools.
Oh, sorry, Pat. Okay. So I apologize there.
No problem, but please chime in frequently.
It's unusual.
I could miss something too.
I appreciate that, Anthony.
Yeah,
That's
we
helpful.
have a regional school and a school union, and they the superintendent's actually divided up several ways. She has probably 5 different committees to answer to at any given time.
Okay.
But all members of the Amherst School Committee are also members of the Regional School Committee. So.
Well, that makes it easy, right?
And there's also a Union 26 and a Pelham School Committee.
Well, that's the others. That's the school union.
So, and the point of the provision is that the town manager has responsibilities, but those responsibilities do not extend into the schools and the library trustee jobs. It's limiting their authority in those areas, which is usually limited by law, but it makes it very clear.
Meg?
Okay.
One of the controversies about the school committee is that the Amherst members have shorter terms than the regional members. So in effect, less power because they have to be running for office. Just raising that as something that's come up.
That's an excellent point. I was going to raise the same thing. That is addressed in section 4, and I feel like it's definitely worthy of more of our discussion.
Right. Okay, we'll talk about that in section 4. Great. So do you want to scroll down a bit, Anthony? Okay, we were up to G, so we'll go to the next page. Great. The town manager also is responsible for record keeping, submitting the annual budget, capital improvement plan, and a long-term financial forecast. I wanted to make a note, I'll talk about this at the end, but part of your survey plan, and you may want to reach out a little bit more directly to the town manager themselves for even earlier information than the July 31st date. is to find out, how often how is this long-term financial forecast working out? How are these things working out? How often does it happen? Who's involved? Is there anything that needs clarification with respect to some of these budgeting duties?
I did have a few questions here. The first one is just sort of like an analytical question, like, does it make sense? It says sign all bonds and notes for the borrowing of money and be responsible for purchasing all supplies, materials, services, and equipment for all departments. And I guess, like, I just wonder, like, how does that work? As in, like, if, say, the police need to repair their car, or the DPW needs a specific part or asphalt or whatever, is it bureaucratic to have the town manager execute those sort of contracts rather than the employees who are in the field and could just do it while they're there? Does that pose any hiccups to the town?
Well, there's language, I believe it's later in this section or a little bit. The town manager is allowed to designate other people to perform these functions. And so but at the same time, there are a number of checks and balances, and the town manager is ultimately responsible for these things.
Okay.
So where there's responsibility for signing bonds and notes for borrowing of money, et cetera, some things can be delegated, some cannot by procurement law and other state and local law. But there's an assumption for all of these that this is about the responsibility for these things. And obviously, many of these things happen through the actions of staff.
Okay, great. That's
but I
helpful.
think-
I have two other questions, but I'll let Bernie
Sure.
go before me.
Just wanted to note that there's a process here. You can't sign a contract until an appropriation exists that has to be certified by our comptroller, and then Paul will sign off on it unless he's delegated that to another person. So there's different kinds of purchasing. Obviously, the folks at the highway garage twisting wrenches have contracts or can just go to the local parts supply and pick up spark plugs. They don't need anybody's permission to do that. That gets tracked. Holly makes certain we're all being honest about what we do. Larger stuff like bonds, like long-term contracts or expensive equipment, no responsible vendor or lender would allow for someone other than the manager to sign off once it's been certified to them that an appropriation exists. So there's a process.
That answers my question very well. Thanks, Bernie. So my other two questions here were, my only concern with some of these sections is it says submit to the council an annual budget, capital improvement plan, and long-term financial forecast. He sets and works with BCG and whatnot to set these sort of guidelines or targets for the school and for the library, but then above it says he's not responsible for the school or the library. So I feel like unless there's more in the budget section that's different, those things feel in contradiction to each other to me. And then the other thing that I was gonna note was just, it looks like there's quite a bit here about the compensation of town employees and compensation of different groups and labor unions and so on and so forth. I know the school committee sends people to negotiate with their school union, but it's interesting that the town doesn't send town councilors to negotiate with the town's municipal union. So I found that sort of a strange oddity. And then the other thing here is I was just surprised so much language about compensation for town employees, but no language about compensation for the manager. I'm surprised this doesn't set any sort of guidelines or any sort of policies around the manager's compensation. I know somebody told me he makes more than the governor, so that seems like something that we might want to add here.
Just in brief, there is a section on compensation a little further down that we'll talk about. It's very standard to have to identify where the buck stops with respect to signing the collective bargaining agreements and approving the class and comp and classification plans and compensation plans. And it usually rests with the executive branch. However, it all has to be appropriated. And so, you know, they're not necessarily acting on their own in this. There are systems, and they bring counsel to the table with collective bargaining agreements and have an HR department that participates as well. This is a lot more about the ultimate responsibility of who somebody has to be the point person for signing these agreements.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just surprised the town councilors don't participate, because I know the school committee members actively participate.
Well, I'm sure that there's some input gathering, but I wouldn't pretend to know exactly how that works in the end. So that's a great question for the town manager and town council about whether that works for them or doesn't work for them. Traditionally, council often their role is limited to appropriating the amounts that have been chosen, and the executive branch is usually more involved in the actual setting of compensation and collective bargaining agreements. It's kind of a traditional division of labor. It may work a little differently in your town, and there may be different types of input that are involved. Some of it is voluntary input, some of it is just behind the scenes asking what you think of this kind of input. So it might be over prescribing to set that out in a charter, but it's certainly something that you can ask whether it's working.
And in most cities, or where you have a mayor or this is like kind of the city form, you've got the council will ratify particularly a collective bargaining agreement.
Okay, that makes more sense. I'd never seen Amherst ratify a collective bargaining agreement on the town council level, so that's why I had noticed that was odd. But that makes sense why a lot of places would do that. Bernie?
It makes, there's a good argument to be made to not have the people who will ratify the agreement be part of the people negotiating the agreement. I always, having participated in negotiating a couple of school contracts, my preference always was to have a professional negotiator represent the community, and not to have members of the elected officials who are going to ratify the agreement be part of the negotiation. Once you're part of the negotiations, you have skin in the game, and you have positions you want to take, and you're not, so you have the problem of having a couple of people who've participated in the negotiations, then having staked out a position, or positions, and then going back to their body that has to ratify the agreement. It gets messy doing that. My preference, again, as a manager, was to have myself and council negotiating with the union, as opposed to having members of the ratifying committee, whether they be select persons or whomever, engaged in the negotiation. It's also when you're an office holder and you're an elected, and you have in the back of your head, I really need to get reelected. I think that also can affect your behavior at the bargaining table.
All right. I don't think I have anything else here. My only question was, I guess, is it normal for other towns to set any sort of limits on executive compensation? Like, is that something that has been done in other municipalities in their charters?
I don't believe I've seen that, at least not in the charter. I think the charter is really intended to, stand for a long periods of time and is difficult to change. So there tends to be more of a, um, not putting things in the charter that would change over time or could be impacted to give the maximum amount of flexibility to somebody who would be negotiating, negotiating an employment agreement with, a department head or the town manager. I have not seen that as part. Anthony, maybe have you seen any sort of
Um,
restrictions?
I have heard that we'll have to do some research. I've
Yeah.
heard that there is a community that has something like you can only be a certain multiple of like the lowest paid employee. I've heard that. I've not seen it, so we can do some research there. But again, this is a process where the council is signing and negotiating a contract. So it's but yeah, we can do some further research. I don't have I can't off the top of my head think of a community that has that.
That's
You know,
great. Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, I'd heard about that like in Norway where they had like you can't get paid more than X amount more than your lowest paid employee. Something like that here might be worth considering. I mean, it's certainly an interesting policy. So yeah, I appreciate you guys doing more research on it.
great. We'll definitely make a note of that. I do recall something what Anthony had said. I'm not sure if that passed or if it was just an idea. So we definitely have to do a little more research. Okay. We'll move on down the page if so as essentially the CEO of the town manager has the authority to investigate or look into the affairs of any town agency under the town manager's authority, to prosecute, defend, and compromise all litigation, and to hire a special counsel when needed. Also, they serve as, unless otherwise provided in agreements, like your regional school agreement, they serve as the town's liaison to any regional entity and look for opportunities for intergovernmental cooperation. There may be a transportation, the transportation authority that they're part of, or, they're kind of the default representative of the town in those. They promote dialogue and partnerships among the town council, town employees, residents, businesses, and other local entities. That is something that I don't, that is something that seems to be relatively unique. I haven't, this is a newer charter than some of the others, and there's definitely a move to the promotion of partnerships and the relationships between the different branches of government. So I think that's what this S is intended to address. They make a state of the town address with the town council president, as referenced back in section 2.2. They attend and participate in not fewer than 3 public forums addressing the budget as provided in Article 5, the master plan, and in school matters provided in 4.2E. I think if we get to Article 5, there are different parts in the budget that require public hearings, and the town manager is expected to attend those, as well as attend the master plan forums and the school forums. They communicate regularly with the public regarding local issues, proposals, actions, and challenges. And this section B is also a relatively new provision in charters, which really is about encouraging transparency and making that a requirement of the position. W, delegating, authorizing, or directing subordinates to exercise any power, duty, or responsibility which they may exercise. That's what we spoke a little bit before. The town manager does not have to do every single one of these by themselves. They may hire a communications director, or they may hire somebody to perform these actions on their behalf. And X, perform any other duties as necessary or may be assigned by the charter or by a vote of the town council. So the town council can require the town manager can add to this list of duties. Okay, I'll give it a pause for some input from the committee. And actually, let me also ask Anthony if he has any other comments on these.
No, I was trying to find the button, but no.
Okay.
Do you have any more red language on this one?
I don't. Oh, just these are
Okay.
general powers and duties. I wanted to talk about any areas of concern, but my other note was really to, reach out to the town manager and find out if any of these if they're finding challenges to performing any of these or feel that additional language or different language would be helpful.
Yeah, I'll just note I know that he does attend school matters, public forums on the school budget that the town council holds, because the town council holds 2 of those. But I think it might be worth clarifying, like maybe we want him to attend some of the public forums that the school committee has to get an idea of what they're facing, what they're looking at, etc. And I don't know what exactly that would look like, but that might be something worth specifying to have him like attend some of the school committee forums.
Perhaps this would be something where you could gather a list of questions and either invite, either ask the town manager, what are they attending these forums? What does this look like? Or, once we get through the charter, you may want to gather a list of questions and either have the town manager in to ask for their input or just generally ask them, how they feel about the section specifically relating to their jobs and if there's any additions or amendments that would help them do their job. I'm sure you will. I mean, if there's been any public input on these that you wanted us to look into further, please feel free to let us know.
Raphael? You're muted again.
There has been public input, I think a fair amount. League of Women Voters has a recommendation that they shared. I think we had it's in the package for today. Someone noted a number of sort of considerations, things like have citizens provide input to the council, district representatives for manager review. There's something about reviewing application for seats on town committees and boards appointed by the town manager to be in public records and with the consent of the applicant. There's a list of things in something that a community member submitted today. Or it's in the notes in the package today. So there are a number of things.
Yeah, I do remember one comment that was like, what about like a regional, like getting regionalized services, like regionalized police or whatever. There was a comment about that. I feel like that's pretty squarely under the manager's control, and we can't really dictate any sort of agreement like that in the charter, even though it would be an excellent idea if it could happen.
I would say I saw those comments,
Mhm.
and I think they're addressed a little bit further down where we talk
Okay.
about powers of appointment, and some of these others. So, and the review process.
Okay.
So it's definitely something that we can build up and talk about a little bit more. Once we finish section 3.3, you'll see that there's other areas that those comments may be a little bit more appropriate to follow.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Okay. So let's move down to the powers of appointment because that seems to be a little bit, the crux of what some of your comments concern. First, A discusses town staff. And so, except as otherwise provided, perhaps, council may have certain roles that they appoint. The town manager appoints all department heads. They're subject to the provisions of 2.1, which essentially means that appointments are effective within 14 days, not DYS, but days, until approved or rejected by town council. So town council has 14 days to either reject, or they can even approve an appointment earlier than 14 days. So there is, and that seems to be, having the town council have some say in rejecting or approving the appointments of department heads, tends to give a little bit of a balance. On the other hand, they are approved if the town council does nothing, the department heads are approved. So that, the town manager can do their job and fill these positions. The town manager provides for the use and composition of search committees for department heads, and also appoints officers, subordinates, employees for whom no other method of selection is provided in this charter. So should I pause there? Does anyone want to talk about department head appointments? Or are we more focused on committee appointments, which comes a little bit later?
I guess I have a question. I think somebody was saying that this 14-day waiting period, sometimes you get a candidate who's interviewing in multiple towns, and you really want somebody, you want to bring them in, but then you say we can't hire you for 14 days. I guess they get an offer, right? And so then it's just not official for 14 days. Is that right?
Yeah, they get a conditional offer, and the reason it's 14 days is because, the council usually meets twice a month. So you're waiting for the next meeting essentially, for them to discuss it. The town council can then just approve it quickly than that if the meeting happens to be 2 days away instead of 2 weeks away. It's fairly standard, and I can completely understand the concern of losing a candidate over those 2 weeks in the meantime. It could happen, but it's also, you'll notice that the time for waiting is shorter for employees than it is for selecting appointments to multiple member bodies. And it is for that reason, in order to get back to people as soon as they can. The alternative would be reducing it, but it might not be practical to reduce it to less than 14 days, just because they're probably not going to call an emergency meeting of council to make a decision on this. The alternative would be not giving the council the right to ratify these.
Erica?
Yeah, it may just be more relevant for a later section, because this provision, as I read it, is just about the that time period. And there's a great deal more detail about appointments in the later section. Is that right?
There's detail about the appointments to committees. There's a little
Yeah.
more detail with that.
But when it says appointments to multiple member bodies under C, this does not overlap with the department heads provision in A. Is that right?
Correct.
Because there's, I think, a sort of, compared to the other section, a lack of detail in the sort of process and either restrictions, powers, or provisions of what that entails for department heads.
I think that it's probably, you're right, there's less detail with staff. I think it's a form of government where, and Anthony can chime in too, it's a form of government where the chief executive is, given some leeway to craft their own staff, because they need a group of individuals that are, competent and doing the jobs that they need to do. So, as the executive branch, they're just given more more leeway, with the ratification by town council really being the check and balance on whom they're choosing. The other, the other issue regarding this is really about bringing it down to one candidate and bringing one candidate for a thumbs up, thumbs down vote, rather than having, it really discourages applicants from applying if they have to go through public hearing processes and application processes in an open meeting type of session. So, it's more about best practices in hiring and employment, which is why there are just fewer processes than there is for the multiple member bodies. Anthony, do you have any input on that?
No, Pat, you nailed it right on the head. I think the only thing I would add is, just harkening back to your town form of government that you changed to. There may have been more process there there was more process there because you had those authorities split between the town manager and the select board. Now the town manager has, basically has absorbed all of the executive branch authority, and so they are, so generally, they have, particularly in terms of employees, they're giving significant leeway in terms of making those appointments and removals and so on and so forth. So there usually is not much here in terms of process around those things in charters like this. I would say the 14-day approval is relatively unique for this form of government, but we're seeing more and more communities want to have a little bit more say. I would say more around the multi-member board appointments than staff, but sometimes that's leaking into the staff appointments as well.
And it just reminded me of a point. One thing that I wanted to add is that with the advent of a professional HR department and the sophistication of federal and state labor and employment laws, it's important to have a lot of flexibility in order that the rules are followed and that the decisions are being made by people who are trained in labor and employment law, rather than having, than being exposed to, the group dynamic of having more input from more sources that aren't necessarily following the labor and employment laws and aren't trained in it. So it's the sophistication of federal and state labor law that really kind of demands more flexibility here.
Yeah, I feel like having some of that flexibility makes a lot of sense, especially given that some of the town councilors might not really have any experience in this. Bernie?
As we saw with the appointment process of the police chief, we certainly do jump through lots of hoops here in town, having participated in 2 screening committees for finance directors. I can tell you that the fastest part of it is the 14-day waiting for council approval. It's, hiring can be painfully slow, and you do lose candidates, for one. And for two, I think the point about people valuing a certain degree of privacy, especially if they have one job and they're searching for another, in terms of the hiring process, is a valid one. So, we're spending a lot of time talking about something, but actually the easy part of it is getting the appointee in front of the council to make a decision about the appointee. The tough part, which is very much involves our HR department, our DEI department, is in the hiring and is in the recruiting and the screening. So I think we're spending much too much time on this. We've got a process now that I think takes too long, but that's me.
I just had one question about the C, which is multiple member bodies. Which is, it says all residents shall be, that they should be residents of the town at the time of appointment and throughout the term of appointment. Theoretically, that makes sense. I was just wondering, what about a situation like I don't know, someone's renting one house and moving to another house and has a little waiting period where they're in an Airbnb or a hotel in Pelham or wherever. Would that mean they get kicked off the body for that period of time and then have to reapply or not?
You know, those are all going to be, you know, I think the lawyer in me wants to say that depends. But I think that is going to be, you know, a temporary stay. You know, if your house is being renovated and you're a little bit out of town, may not be an issue. It's going to be depending on the length of time. Some charters say, you know, have it included, you know, who gets to say whether the appointing body, which in this case is the town manager with the approval of the select board, would be able to make that decision of whether this is a temporary move from out of the town or not.
Okay, that seems reasonable. I would just hate for someone to have to move for 2 months and be kicked off a committee.
Absolutely. And at the same time, you probably don't want to memorialize that in the charter because you want to allow some flexibility for situations. You know, what if it was, you know, is it 30 days total? Is it, you know, 3 weeks added up to, you know, so
makes
it
sense.
allows for some interpretation and flexibility for
Absolutely.
those situations.
Meg? You're muted.
Okay, is this the time in the discussion to talk about the multi-member committees appointments?
Can I just review that section really quickly with you?
Yeah,
before
that's,
we
I don't
dive
have the
into it?
charter. I don't have it in front of me where I am right now. And
Sure.
I just wanted to know if this is the time, so I'll wait till you review it. Thank you. I
It
just
will
heard
be in
one
1
comment
minute.
about, yeah,
The next section is the appointments to multiple member bodies, and it's a similar process, except that there's a 30-day window for the town council to approve or reject the candidates. There is also there's also a note that there should be established a residence advisory committee to assist with the evaluation and selection of candidates. The town manager has the authority to establish this committee. It's advisory to the town manager. The town, and it has general language that they are appointing individuals with relevant expertise or experience, and that they should be establishing policies to actively encourage a diverse pool of applicants. So I will let you, there's also, it's very rare and interesting that they chose to add an actual position into the charter, a charter developed position of community participation officer, which is someone who's appointed to increase participation in local government in a number of ways and enhancing public engagement. Again, that's part of this emphasis on increasing engagement and transparency. So that's a relatively new development to have a community participation officer included. So I'll pause it there after my overview and listen to your comments.
Meg?
thank you. We've had quite a bit of comment on not something in the charter about the what's it called? Committees, multi-body committees, but about the administration of them, which is the desire for more transparency. And the opinion that's been suggested is people, for example, candidates want to be anonymous or they might not put their name in if it was known publicly, but you could have public notification of people who've applied and give candidates the option of maintaining confidentiality. So I know this, I've heard a lot of comments on that whole appointment process, seeking more transparency.
Thank you. Other questions, comments?
I guess I've heard a little bit about what's the deal with the Residents Advisory Committee? How does that work? And I guess it's just that it's people that the there's no requirement for them to be any, there's no requirements about it. It's basically that he just has that, or he or she has to have somebody, have to have a committee to assist, right?
There,
I'm on. Sorry,
oh,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think that is something we can definitely look into, how that's chosen. I know at least one other community that has a similar residence advisory committee that is chosen by the city manager in that case. And it is, a fairly, at least there, it's probably fairly obvious, open who's on that committee. And we can look into that a little bit more on how it's done in your town. But this is intended, by being a part of the charter, the town manager is allowed to appoint who's necessary. This may be a combination of residents, the HR department, people who are already staff, and people who may, possibly the community participation officer. But I think maybe we can look into it a little bit more. I actually don't know how it works in your town.
I think we have a member on the committee.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll call on Bernie and then Meg.
Well, the concern I've heard about appointments to multi-member bodies is it takes forever.
Yeah.
People that make applications and the applications aren't acknowledged, aren't responded to, and folks lose interest. So here again, we have to ask the question of whether are we creating too much process. It's just a thing in one of the local news outlets about how the town council's urging citizens to apply for committees. Well, if it takes forever if you have a process for application and it takes forever to manage those applications and actually interview people, folks lose interest. So that's again, we need to look at how we can slim down the process to get people to make it easier for people to apply and make it easier for people to be selected.
Yeah, thanks, Bernie. I agree. I'll have my own statement and then I'll call on you, Meg. What I'm thinking here is just a general surprise that these aren't public records. We don't, like, when someone fills out a CAF, there's not really a way to track that outside of the town manager's office. The council can't see it, the public can't see it, etc. And I understand, like, there's like personal information, address, etc. But generally, I feel like these are reasonable things to have be made public with some of that information redacted. I don't know how that would be written here. Meg?
So I'm on the resident advisory committee. So if anybody wants to hear more about it, there are 3 of us. And I don't think I agree with Bernie that the process is cumbersome. I don't believe the committee makes it more cumbersome because basically it's the interview that the town manager has. I mean, if anything, it's the town manager's available time that slows it down. And it's Jim Pistrang, Anastasia Ordonez, and myself, so we have different perspectives on things. And it's mostly the role I'll make this really quick. The role we play is to listen and to participate after the interview. We have some standard questions we ask, but to help the town manager think through what was learned in the interview. But I can have 100% sure that this step isn't making it more cumbersome at all, because it's only 3 of us and we meet quite quickly when we're summoned for a meeting. Only one of us attends each interview. The town manager just is so busy. The interviews are only 15 minutes. 15-minute interviews to be on a committee.
Okay. Other comments, questions about this before we move on? Seeing none, I'll let you guys move along.
Okay. So I'm interested in hearing whether you have any experience with the community participation officer and how that's working out. If that is something that has, because that's a newer type of article in a charter. I'm just curious if you have any experience with that and if that's working for you.
Yeah, we used to have three. Two of them moved on to other positions, but we have Angela, who is just excellent, in my opinion, and is phenomenal at her job, and I see her at pretty much every event I go to.
Great.
Yeah, I think the provision that the community the officer may be a current town employee, it was basically divided between a few different employees, and then two of those have since left. So, but I do feel like Angela is the town manager's assistant, and she is active in reaching out to people in the community.
Raphael.
Yeah, I think in some towns, I think I've seen a longer list of like things that they do, and one of them includes like processing citizen complaints and inquiries. So something to think about.
Erica.
Never mind, I don't need-
The question is a good one about how is the community participation officer working out? I think we may not be the best audience for that question because there's different levels of engagement. Like how is that role seen, received, effective to a more general population of people who aren't already engaged in some kind of committee work or other kinds of town process of some form or another. But I think it's a really good question, one I'd be really interested to dig into when we see comments incoming or survey results or both, or listen to people when we actually meet with them and ask about engagement with the community participation officer.
Right.
Yeah, thanks. Raphael, you have another comment?
Also wonder if it would be worthwhile for this committee to engage with this officer around this process. Just to hear more about their work, what they've done, what they've heard. So just something to think about.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. We should certainly discuss with her about that. Other comments, questions? No? Meg.
Just a process question. I just don't want to talk too much. Having like Andy been on the charter commission, more thoughts on this and the history and is it violating open meeting law if I send a sort of summary of other additional information about that position?
Good to know.
Don't know. So,
I don't think so. I don't know.
okay.
We don't like to advise on open meeting questions because that's just not part of our role. That's your town council's role. But maybe you can ask, maybe you can ask Athena whether whether that would be a good idea.
Yep.
Or maybe it's
I just
just
don't wanna-
something that you can submit in writing to everyone.
Yeah, I could put it. It's not a big deal. It's just there's more history that isn't worth taking everybody's time
Okay.
Yeah,
right
thank
now.
you. Pat, you want to move us along?
Sure, absolutely. Anthony, you want to move it down a little bit? Oh, what? Great. Okay. So, a couple of things we already talked about. The powers of suspension and removal. Town manager has authority to discipline, except otherwise provided by law, etc. And they can authorize an officer, or other employee to exercise such authority. That's, they have the power of appointment. They also have the power of suspending and removal. And the next, I wanted to get to the compensation. Compensation is pretty simple. It says they shall receive such compensations as town council shall determine within the limits of appropriations. And as we already discussed, we can do a little research into whether there are any other types of limits that are out there currently, because we're not sure. We're not sure if they've been enacted, if any have been enacted, but we'll look into that.
That's great. Thank you.
Interim town manager. So here it says the vacancy shall be filled as soon as possible, and that the town council can appoint a qualified person as interim town manager. I just wanted to tell you the distinction between an interim and a temporary. And this is a very common provision. The town manager can designate by writing, if they have to be gone for a couple weeks for medical leave or something like that, they can designate by letter who shall serve as temporary town manager in their absence, and they can perform duties that are necessary during that time. And the town council has to allow that person, the named interim person, to continue to be that for at least 30 days. And so if the leave extends longer than 30 days, then the town council can appoint its own its own temporary town manager until they decide whether, they'll need to find an interim or a permanent. So an interim is if the town manager leaves and they need someone temporary while they're looking for someone new. A temporary town manager is if the town manager is just leaving for a limited period of time, is taking a leave. These are both, unless there's anyone brought up any issues, these are both very, in most charters. Okay, so we'll just scroll down to the next part.
Great.
Okay. In general, this regards the removal or suspension of a town manager. So in general, many of the terms of employment, oh, I'm sorry, am I moving too fast? I think Andy has a comment.
I'm sorry, I accidentally hit the button.
Oh, okay. So in general, the terms of employment for a town manager will be contained in their employment contract. However, many charters include a provision that basically gives town council the right to make a preliminary finding of suspension or termination and give the town manager a certain period of time to request a public hearing, a public meeting with the town council, so that they have an opportunity for due process in the public, in addition to just following the terms of the employment contract. I think if you talk to town managers, they would say that this provision, because they might not be able to negotiate something like this into their employment contract, this provision kind of allows them kind of a base understanding that, if there is a suspension or termination, they will be able to request a public meeting and that it won't just happen without any due process. I'm not sure. Obviously, you don't have any experience with this yet. So I think this is probably something that will stay as is unless somebody has some public input into changing it for any reason. Does anyone have any questions about this section? Okay, so let's move down a little bit. We'll move down to the next section. Okay. And that's the part that it's regarding the annual review of town manager. It simply states the town council shall conduct an annual review for the purpose of assessing the town manager's performance. I understand there's some public input into this, and this might be an area where we could perhaps provide a little more research on what other communities are doing. I know that in some communities, they are looking at the possibility of adding things like how do you conduct a review? What's involved in conducting a review? Perhaps adding in, the council shall meet with the town manager, every 2 years to set out priorities or goals by which they'll be measured for this. So we can provide a little more input into this, but I'm also interested in hearing your perspectives on how the annual review process is working and whether there have been any suggestions for changing the process.
I don't have anything. Bernie?
Well, just to point out that the council sets the manager's goals on an annual basis now, and that we have the town employs sort of a 360-degree evaluation. Citizens are invited to comment and fill out review forms and the like, as does the council. So it's a considerable exercise that goes far beyond the council simply deciding that the manager's done a good job or not. And I don't know, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that would be added to it, given it's pretty comprehensive now.
And this may be something that doesn't require an elevation to a charter change. It's something that if there's already a sufficient process in place, then the charter allows the flexibility of the town council to continue to use that process without limiting them in scope. Okay, great. Okay, well, if there's, let me just peek at the time, if there's no more comments on that, we can move to section 4.
Excellent.
Let's see. So, my first comment on this, which I'm not sure if I I did indicate. So I'll tell you, I do have some comments on it. The offices that are filled by election includes the school committee, the library board of trustees, and the housing authority. And there is also an Oliver Smith will elector, and the eligibility for these offices include they have to be, let me see, you may not be another officer in the town office under the Article 2 or Section 4, and that you must live in town, and if they remove per town during the term that they're elected, it shall be declared vacant and filled in the manner and filled by the vacancy provisions. The vacancy provisions are that the select board and the remaining members of the board vote by a roll call vote to replace that person. I'm just trying to go over it briefly, but compensation is set in the annual town budget, and increases or reductions must be adopted by majority vote. So a few issues that I wanted to point out, you may want to get input specifically from the school committee, library board, and the housing authority on whether these current provisions are working for them. They're fairly basic provisions, but we're going to talk more. It sounds like you have some discussion when we get to the school part of it. So you might want to solicit input. And I know that you're sending out your survey, and you may get that response from them. But if you don't get enough response, you may want to ask them specifically about their own provisions. Also, I am curious if you feel that have there been any issues with the filling of vacancies? Is it working out for the town, for the town council and remaining board members to fill those vacancies?
I feel like it's been working out okay. I was just going to comment that I'm assuming the same thing about the residency for multiple member bodies is true here, that we discussed earlier. And then the only other thing was, it's probably down further, but those terms of office.
Okay, yeah, the terms go under the individual boards, the elected boards. But
Yeah.
yes, the residency requirement, the removal, yeah, it's going to be it's going to be interpreted under a reasonableness standard. And it's going to be along the same lines of whether you'd still be able to vote in town. For example, a college student who is away for college is still allowed to vote in their hometown if they haven't changed their residency. So it's going to be related more, I think it would be a fair interpretation to apply the voting requirements to these elected official positions, even more so than it would be to the appointed officials. And I don't see Anthony up there, but if he's listening, he may also have an opinion on this.
No, I have nothing to add.
Nope, nothing, great. So, if it's not broke, you don't have to fix it. If you're fine, I was curious if you have sufficient number of residents running for these offices, if you're finding that they're full in their contested elections.
Andy?
As far as the filling of vacancies, I think we basically just sort of transferred over how it worked with the select board and the committee to the council and the committee. So that, and we had a vacancy on the school committee, and we had 11 people applying for 3 spots, I think. And so that worked out pretty well. As far as sufficient numbers of residents running for office, how does that, what part of this is that applying to?
I just thought when we get down to the rest of it, we'll have some discussions about, how many people are on these boards, et cetera. Just making sure
Yeah.
that you're able to fill them and that there don't need to be any changes in the number of members.
I mean, I personally feel like we should have a smaller town council, but I'm not sure that that's within our purview. If we could make it so, I would love to argue for that.
Pat, oh, sorry, I see Bernie's hands up.
Yeah,
Andy,
I
this is-
think
This
there's
is all
some,
about, hold on, this is all about just school committee, library trustees, housing authority. This isn't town council, so that would be a different section, I think.
Correct.
Bernie?
with the housing authority, there's always a challenge getting the gubernatorial appointee on the committee. But I think when there's the opportunity for appointment, we see a pretty robust response, as Andy illustrated. Running for office is another matter altogether. So we don't have as robust a competition as one might expect. And long ago, far away, the Collins Center actually tracked contested elections statewide, city by city, town by town. It basically demonstrated that the smaller the community, the less likely you were to have the less likely you were likely to have people competing for offices. I think Amherst could enjoy some more robust competition, but I'm at a loss to say how we might actually encourage that.
Oh, and Bernie, you kind of stole my thunder. I was going to suggest, I don't know, Pat, if we'd already planned this, but since the charter's adoption, we can do a competitiveness analysis for the past couple elections in terms of the number of people running for available seats.
That would be great.
That would be
Yeah,
interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah,
Andy?
I think that would be interesting. But again, the notion of running for office, and it's not a function necessarily of the charter. It's a function of the process and the putting yourself out in public the way it's required, and fundraising and everything else. It's you find, and I've certainly, I've had my experience. it's become more difficult, I think, to run for office. I don't know how I could, I don't have any good ideas as to how you might make it simpler, make it easier.
Awesome. Andy?
Just, we did get a suggestion about the housing authority, that we have a couple of appointed positions that Bernie said there's a governor appointment. But then there are elected portions, and we haven't had much call for people running for that office. And there was a suggestion that we might want to consider making that an appointed position, where people who are interested in housing might be able to go through the CAF process and get involved rather than having to run for election.
I did note that, and I do have some notes when we get to that section. And I wanted to point out that, as you know, you have a couple tiers of decisions that you're making. There are those that the council can make without state intervention. Changing these elected offices would likely require a special act. So it would be something that you would make a recommendation on, that, but, if you are solely keeping to the kinds of changes that don't require a special act, that would, you would probably have to talk to KP about what changes you could make with or without a special act.
Thanks.
There are more substantial changes if you're talking about changing appointed and elected officials and the numbers, et cetera. So let's dive into the individual committees. Starting with the school committee. There's 5 members of the school committee elected by the voters. The terms are 2 years, beginning in January. And there's the swearing in of officers after each regular town election. There will be a chair and a vice chair, and it includes really this. I think most charters have almost the same language as the powers and duties of the school committee, because most of their duties are outlined by state law. And that is, they appoint the superintendent of schools, and you can scroll down a little bit further, and make policies. They review the annual budget. They make a report to town council. This public forum section is a little bit unique, but the chair of the school committee calls at least one public forum a year. And there's a requirement that all regular meetings shall provide for public comment at the school committee. So I will pause there, because I think I've heard a few recommendations regarding this.
Yeah, I have 2 comments, and other folks can raise their hand if they want. First one is just 2 years is wicked short. I think 3 years, 4 years would make sense. But 2 years is far too short. Just as you start to learn how the place works, you have to start thinking about running for re-election. So I think we have to examine changing that to some extent. And my other question was just more of a grammar thing: to review and approve an annual operating budget for the Amherst Public Schools. That makes it sound like there's other operating budgets that other people put forward. I would say the annual operating budget might sound better. Other than that, that's it.
And I think in the next section, it says an annual report as well.
Yeah, same thing, exactly. Just grammar thing. It's like, we don't want members of the public thinking, ooh, I can submit a budget for the schools.
I think you probably, with respect to the term length, you may have had a discussion at the last meeting about how 3 years would be a very difficult term for a fall election. You'd have to move you could have 2 or 4 years in the fall. 3 years would be difficult, because right now the state doesn't approve the elections in an even year in the fall. So for the local elections in the fall during even years, because it conflicts with federal and state elections. So you may have had that discussion last time with regard to the other terms. And we can talk more about that, but 2 or 4 years, if again, it may be something that is outside your narrow mission of things that the council can do without the legislature, but it may not be. So, but we'll keep, that's kind of the second tier of changes.
Erica?
Yeah, two quick questions. I'm sorry if I didn't if you said this and I didn't catch it, but is the length of the term dictated by or outlined by the state in the guidelines in the way that you were describing?
I can, the length of the term, I'll have to check on that. I don't think that, I think that that length of term can be changed by special act. But in general, for all local elections, if you have a 3-year term, it's those that have an odd number years of terms, it's held in the spring in order to avoid a conflict with federal and state elections that are during even years in the fall. So
Okay. And then my other question was, there's nothing stipulated about seating an entire committee at once that I can see, right? It's a kind of, people can serve one term, several terms.
correct. They're staggered too, I believe.
They're not.
Oh, no, the 2-year terms aren't
2-year term.
staggered, I don't think.
Right, that's what I was trying to
2
clarify.
years are not staggered.
So it's 2 years,
I believe everyone's up every 2 years.
right? I'm trying to tease out whether there's even a possibility for a kind of staggered approach, given the off-year stipulation that you were describing.
If you go with the 4-year term, you can have staggered terms.
Yeah, that might make sense. Sorry to jump to the next section here. I just noticed something about library trustees. We haven't had much competition for library trustees terms, if any. I almost feel like that number of 6 members could be made a little bit lower, given that that's even less than the school committee and is an even number, which is also odd.
Again, changing the number of members it would require a special act. Is that right?
I believe so, but yeah.
Okay. That's good.
I'm always hesitant to say for sure, but yeah, I believe it would require a special act, but we're not the final arbiter of that, but yes.
And in your experience, how likely is a special act to get passed if it's just affecting Amherst?
It can take some time for sure. If it's a simple special act and is not a controversial one, then smaller, more narrowly tailored special acts are more likely to get passed.
Yeah, I would just add it also sort of things that are new versus things that the legislature has seen before are I guess likely to get more scrutiny. So for example, changing the length from 2 to 4 year terms, that is not that unusual. However, having a 3-year term staggered for a city that has its election in November would be very unique and would probably raise some questions at the State House.
Okay, thank you. Meg?
Meg, you're muted.
The red thing isn't there. Something might be wrong with your mic, Meg. We'll go back to you. Oh, I'm getting something a little bit.
Can you,
Try that again, Meg.
can you hear me now?
Barely.
Okay, never mind. I'll send it in the chat.
Okay. Sure. You can send an email or whatever. Yeah. Pat, you want to move us along?
Sure. So you know, we talked about the school committee, and one comment was possibly changing the term. Library board, 6 members, 2-year terms as well. And that is something if, you know, when the public comment comes in, if they similarly have to prepare an annual report and have, public comment at their meetings. You can, you know, you may choose to have further discussion at some point about whether whether the number of members in term is working for you. So let's move for a minute to the Housing Authority, since I know there's already been public comment on that. I just wanted to make, right now, there's a Housing Authority with 5 members, 3 nominated from the voters, 1 appointed by the state, and 1 member elected by Housing Authority tenants. This is right now, can you scroll down a little bit to my notes, Anthony? Right now, in city forms of government, in general, Mass state law provides that members are usually appointed. Your makeup of the Housing Authority is left over from the traditional town form of government. So under the state law, the town, under a town form of government, you have these members that are elected, 3 elected members and 1 from the tenant association. Under the city form of government, Housing Authority members are usually appointed, and although I believe there is still 1 appointed by the state. So it's just something to keep in mind. If it's not broke, you don't have to fix it. But where there's been some comments about possibly changing to an appointed, I just wanted to let you know that that is generally the how it works under most city governments. They are appointed.
Okay, yeah, I would just say I think it's important to keep that one like tenant member or whatever, just because they know what's actually going on in the community, and can give that perspective.
Yeah, just an FYI, and Pat, you looked at more recently than me, but I think even under the state law, it requires at least 1 person elected from the tenants, even where the city appoints the other members. So there's the
Oh,
point
that makes sense. Great.
It's not clear, you know, when you look at the statute, which I actually linked to here, it talks about the town having an elected tenant. It doesn't say that under the city paragraph, but it may be interpreted that way as well. So we can definitely do some more research on that, if that's something that you're interested in us pursuing.
I honestly, I just think it should stay. As is, I think it's important to have that person.
Okay.
Andy?
Yeah, I would support keeping the tenant rep, but moving it to otherwise appointed. But my question is, would we need a special act to change that?
It's possible you would.
Okay.
I'll let you guys finish up, but then Meg has a question that she texted me from what she couldn't say.
Well, we'll just go next down to 4.5, which is kind of what the last one here. There's an Oliver Smith will elector. You're probably even more familiar with it than I am, and that is a member of a charitable foundation that's elected within your town, that provides small stipends to certain categories of individuals. So that pretty much closes out 4.5. So we'll
I would
listen.
I would just add quickly that Oliver Smith is the father of Sophia Smith, the founder of Smith College.
Oh,
And Sophia got the money to found Smith College from her father.
Oh, interesting.
Oliver Smith is Smith Academy, which is a Voctech high school in Northampton, was founded by Oliver. His daughter went him one better and started a college.
Nice. Interesting. That's a cool history bit. Thank you, Bernie. Meg's question, let me go to her text message here. Was, can a town like Amherst change its elections to March? And if so, does that require an act of the state legislature? That's verbatim what she texted me.
So yes and yes.
Great, thank you. That's an awesome answer. All right, it is almost 8 o'clock. Raphael.
Yeah, I wonder if it's worthwhile, like surfacing beyond the agenda, that these meetings are taking place where this committee is getting some guidance around understanding the charter. We had 2 community members present today. It would be great to move like these sessions beyond us in terms of just letting folks know, like, this is happening. There's a review of the charter, so folks can just see what's happening here, but also hear this conversation. It's great that people here have a chance to sort of weigh in on what they might change, but it would be great for the public to know this is happening. For me, this is a process of understanding the charter, but just let folks know that this is in play. Like, maybe the outreach subcommittee could think about this further, but how do we surface like this work beyond like our agenda, like trying to sort of push a little more in terms of letting people know like this work is happening.
Sorry, thanks, Raphael. Given the time, do we want to press on with the next section, or I'll seek a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, excellent. Andy made, Raphael seconded. We'll start voting. I'm an aye. Thank you, Andy. Raphael?
Aye.
Andy?
Aye.
Bernie?
Yes.
Meg? Okay, I see the thumbs up. Safe travels home, Meg. Ken?
Aye.
Erica?
Yes.
We are adjourned. Thanks so much, Pat.
Thanks,
and Anthony.
everyone.
Thank you.
Yep,
Good
Thank
night.
you. Very
Have a nice
helpful.
night. Bye.